Greetings, viewers, and welcome back to Just Short of Fantastic. It is September, and for many people, that means starting a new school year. And you know who else started a new school year? A little wooden puppet named Pinocchio. That's right, we are about to embark on the journey of our second video in my Queer Disney series. As you can see, I do not own a DVD or Blu-ray copy of Pinocchio. You can bet that I had a VHS though, but I do not have that copy anymore. So all I have now is the original novel that I got out of the library. But we soldier on, we do our best, and without further ado, let's dive in to Pinocchio. Carlo Lorenzini was an Italian author, humanist, and journalist of the mid to late 1800s. Who is better known by his pen name Carlo Collodi, under which he wrote his fairy tale novel, The Adventures of Pinocchio. After burning out from Italian politics, Lorenzini turned to children's literature, as he was taken with the idea of expressing his convictions through allegory. In 1880, he began writing The Adventure of Pinocchio, which found a home in the weekly publication Giornale per i Bambini, the newspaper for children. Upon completion in 1883, it was published as a novel and has since been translated into 260 languages, making it one of the world's most translated books. Similar to the Grimm brothers' fairy tale, scholars say it is still the most translated Italian book and, after the Bible, the most widely read. At the time of writing, children's literature was still a new idea, and adults were concerned about imparting good moral lessons to their readers. In the original serialized version, Pinocchio is hanged for his misbehavior and left to die. It is only at the behest of his editor that Collodi added the second half of the story, in which the puppet is rescued and sent on a journey of self-discovery and redemption, eventually becoming a real boy after learning the lessons of being obedient to one's family and working hard to make a living. Loosely based on Carlo Collodi's children's novel, The Adventures of Pinocchio, Pinocchio was Walt Disney Productions' second animated movie and was a groundbreaking achievement for effects animation, with realistic movement of vehicles and natural elements such as rain, water, lightning, smoke, and shadow. Initially, it was a commercial failure as a result of fewer available markets during World War II. It only became profitable after its 1945 release. In Collodi's original version, the puppet Pinocchio is selfish and violent, and Walt and his writers didn't think that that would play well with modern audiences. They wanted to make the character more likable, and so the writers of the screenplay decided to modernize the character Pinocchio, and the animators made him more innocent and naive, while making Geppetto a softer, more grandfatherly figure, when in the book he is established as short-tempered and violent, getting into a fight with the woodcutter who gave him the enchanted log to make Pinocchio out of. Walt's original animated version of Pinocchio exemplifies the ideal of American exceptionalism, with Pinocchio being taken advantage of at every turn, and having no friends save Jiminy Cricket, whose role as Pinocchio's conscience, appointed by the Blue Fairy, is greatly enhanced from the role he has in the original story, in which he is a talking cricket that tries to give Pinocchio some advice, and Pinocchio throws a hammer at him and kills him, and he comes back later in the story as a ghost and tries to give Pinocchio more advice, which of course Pinocchio does not take. In Disney's animated version, I would say that Jiminy Cricket is a reluctant conscience at best, and the only friend and helper that Pinocchio has on his journey to escape from those who would take economic advantage of him to save his endangered father and to become a real boy. This is an interesting demonstration of the ethos of American independence in pulling yourself up by your bootstraps and not relying on anyone outside the nuclear family unit. In Collodi's version, it's very clear that Pinocchio is lazy and selfish, and Collodi wanted to impart the moral of work hard and be obedient so that one doesn't suffer the consequences of sloth and selfishness. However, in Disney's animated version, Pinocchio is an innocent, naive boy who must learn the difference between right and wrong while navigating the dangers of the outer world. The explicit moral is the value of family, and the implicit moral is making good choices. Let's examine that nuclear family unit, shall we? Geppetto is an old man who lives alone with his male cat Figaro, who is jealous of Pinocchio, and his female fish Cleo, his little water baby. He creates a wooden child and then makes a wish on the wishing star that his Pinocchio will become a real boy, and the blue fairy comes down from the wishing star and grants half of his wish. I mean, let's be honest, an older man, his young son, a gay cat who's essentially a servant, and a sassy female fish. It wasn't intended to be queer, but it's giving queer. And although Geppetto is beyond the age range of sexual activity, thereby safe from being gay, Disney takes great pains to create sexualized situations for Pinocchio as a little wooden boy, especially in Stromboli's puppet show, where every female puppet is flirting with Pinocchio, and it has very strong sexual overtones. It's actually quite uncomfortable when you rewatch the movie. Unlike the 2025 release of the live-action Snow White, the live-action Pinocchio was released in September of 2022 to little fanfare on Disney+. While the critical response to the live-action Pinocchio was mostly negative, they did make some changes to this adaptation that made the viewing of it much more palatable than my rewatching of the animated version. The biggest change being the introduction of more female characters in Sophia, a seagull who is in the original novel, and Fabiana, a girl with a false leg who dreams of being a ballerina but works for Stromboli with her puppet Sabina. These three characters were much needed feminine presences in the story, given that the animated version only had the blue fairy, who only appears for one scene. Speaking of Stromboli, I greatly appreciated that he is no longer queer-coded, and neither are any of the other villainous characters. We've gone past villainous queer coding, thank goodness. And speaking of goodness, it is a pleasure to see Cynthia Erivo as the Blue Fairy. My goodness, what a gorgeous and talented human being. I'm still not really sure how I feel about the update to having both boys and girls being collected for Pleasure Island, but I did greatly appreciate the removal of Tobacco Row, which is a brief, again, racist sight gag in the original animated version. So good for Disney to remove that. As Geppetto is played by the masterful actor Tom Hanks, it makes sense that Disney has given him more interiority. The moral in this live-action version is one of sacrifice. Geppetto sells his most prized possessions, the clocks that his presumably dead wife loved with all her heart. He sells those to buy a boat to go out and find Pinocchio. The moral being sacrifice and, again, the value of family. I do also appreciate the ambiguity of this version at the end when Pinocchio doesn't actually become a real boy, but in his heart he was as real as any real boy could be. In the opening of the live-action adaptation, we clearly see the photo of a young boy on Geppetto's workbench, which transforms what was a story about a naive little boy learning the difference between right and wrong into a story of loss and grief of a parent and of a man who is so broken by that grief that he accepts his child for all of his faults because he just wants so desperately to have a real family again. And as the narrator Jiminy Cricket says, they quickly become a stable, well-adjusted household, which is also nice of the adaptation to put such a strong message for single-parent or older single-parent families. I also greatly enjoy that the puppet show is way less sexualized and that Pinocchio's big "I've Got No Strings" song is mostly him. There's a couple of other puppet backup dancers, but they're no overly sexualized female puppets that are clearly coming onto him, so that is a wonderful change from the animated version. I also really enjoy the introduction of Sabina as a peer and feminine presence as a friend for Pinocchio. That is a much needed addition to the story because, as we know, little boys don't grow up in vacuums. There are often little girls who will have a softening presence, as much as it pains me to say that. I think that's probably why Pinocchio never really resonated with me, because of like the strong genderedness of it and the complete lack of a feminine presence in the animated version outside of the Blue Fairy. So the new version has more female characters in it, and that makes it way more palatable. Just like as a quick side note for the whole Pleasure Island bit, it is weird that Pinocchio changes into a donkey, even though we see him like continue to make mostly good choices. He seems very uncomfortable with the entire concept of being bad and destroying things. And although he is hanging out with Lampwick, he's not, we never really see him doing anything bad. So it's weird that he begins to transform into a donkey. Although I guess maybe that's just sort of like the magic of Pleasure Island. Just being there is enough to turn you into a jackass. But yeah, that's not really a great message for kids. Being like, even if you're just in the presence of people being violent and selfish and chasing pleasure will turn you into a jackass eventually. I don't know. I think I need to let that one like percolate for a bit longer. In the end, Geppetto accepts his boy the way he is. He's proud of him and he loves him, and that's what every child needs to hear. Although the updated live-action version does take pains to establish a heterosexual family ideal, it does the original story more justice by reintroducing friendly characters such as Sophia the Seagull and Fabiana the Puppeteer, who's not in the original novel but takes on sort of the spirit of the Little Blue Fairy, who is a more prominent character than the Blue Fairy of Disney's version. The 2022 version also brings back the theme of community and helping others, which is a core theme of the 1893 novel. And even though it's an event that happens sort of in the background of Pinocchio's journey, the puppeteers leaving Stromboli to start their own family puppet theater has really great queer vibes. And it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it because trans lives matter, that the ambiguous ending can be given a trans reading of Pinocchio's desire to become a real boy. We don't know if Pinocchio magically becomes a real boy, because in his heart and the hearts of his loved ones, he is a real boy, despite outer appearances. So I can see that the story of Pinocchio in all versions of a little puppet becoming a real boy has a trans reading to it. Although, as previously mentioned, all of the sort of gendered expectations about what real boys are like makes that very murky territory to navigate. And so I don't feel qualified to navigate it. That's not really the point of this series, but there is a trans reading there, so that's queer. So what does Pinocchio 2022 get as a Queer Joy rating? I give it a 5 out of 10. This live-action movie adaptation really hinges on my love of Tom Hanks and his like really strong performance. Also the small part that Cynthia Erivo gets, and also Luke Evans is kind of fun, but it's mostly a throwaway character. You can't even really tell it's him. But overall, Pinocchio, despite its obvious trans interpretations, has always been sort of a meh story for me. There was really only so much they could do with it. The live-action version is definitely more palatable than the 1940s animated version, but that's just a matter of upbringing, societal growth, cultural evolution, and my own personal tastes. That is the end. I hope you enjoyed this queer look at Pinocchio, and until next time, stay just short of fantastic.